Okay, so mentioned this in the opening. We've got a new character unlocked here, Katelyn at Cold Lunch Cards. We're going to be talking about Katelyn Clark. This is I feel like, very topical, timely episode based on her just absurd collegiate career and her just breaking the record. So we're going to get into it. Katelyn, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Brett. I'm doing well. How are you?
I cannot complain. I have to ask out of the gates. I've been waiting to actually ask you, just like we're not, I mean, face to face digitally, but like you got to give me some background on your Instagram handle, Cold Lunch Cards.
This is a good question. Everybody always asks me about my handle. I wish I had a better story. Basically, everybody at card shows always has these fancy cases, usually like briefcase Zion, all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't too into that. So I outfitted my Carhartt lunchbox and bought some custom containers from the Container Store and called it good. And so that's where Cold Lunch Cards comes from, is just a little lunchbox I carry around to shows.
I think that's I'm now, like, I think even more highly of that. I thought it might be like I was visualizing some like childhood nickname or something like that, something tied in, but the way you have uh, brought that to your brand is very memorable, and hopefully everybody who's had that same question, who's stumbled across your account on Instagram, now has that answered. So we've got the hardest part of the conversation out of the way.
Good, good. I'm glad. I'm glad.
So we're going to talk about Katelyn Clark, but I like to just learn a little bit more about when new collectors are on, what you collect. I know you from just our interactions as being a big Packers fan. You're repping your team as we have this conversation. So maybe just talk a little bit about your collecting. I know you've got some interesting other collections within there. So the floor is yours. Let's just get educated on Cold Lunch Cards.
Awesome. Yeah, let's start with the Packers. That's like the easy route to start with. So I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which means that the Green Bay Packers runs in my blood. It was passed down through my family. Grew up about 5 to 10 minutes away from Lambeau Field, so it's been kind of like a religious experience watching them grow up. I started really young with Favre as my quarterback, and then Rodgers. Had a couple tough quarterbacks in there that nobody likes to talk about, like Brett Hundley, but we won't talk about that. And now Jordan Love. So it's been a great football culture to grow up with, and that's really what inspired, you know, sports card collecting at a young age, is the nature of the community that I was brought up in, which, you know, at the foundation of that was my dad, who was a football coach growing up and an athletic director. So he really inspired that, first of all. And second, the funny story, the funny part of collecting is when I was a kid, I'd go to the dentist, and my dentist was loved sports and loved cards, apparently. And every time you didn't have a cavity, you got a pack of hand curated football or basketball cards. So that fueled the addiction from a really young age. So that was kind of the start, which started with Packers, just like 25-cent cards. Like 2008 Tops, not Tops Chrome, that was too expensive. Just 2008 Tops was a big year for me, and obviously the Packers were the number one thing in my collection. But as I kind of progressed and matured as a collector, the year I think was 2017, which we all know as Patrick Mahomes' rookie year. I was working in a grocery store that was next to a Target, and on a couple of my breaks, I'd go over to Target and buy packs of 2017 Prism, which happened to be super lucky with the timing of that, and just kept buying them. And I hit one Patrick Mahomes that I remember and kept, still in the collection. But that was kind of like where it started to snowball for me. And then in college, I just took off. And in the past year, I've been collecting like crazy. So the Packers are obviously my main team PC. And then I also collect Anthony Bourdain, who people probably know as a chef and a writer. And he's really my main pillar that I collect.
So I want to ask some questions about Anthony Bourdain, but maybe like this team collecting topic
Mhm.
with a team with such a rich history like the Packers, who, if I'm evaluating team collecting communities within our space, I would say the Packer, like it is very daily. I'll just see new Packers cards because there's so many team collectors out there. How do you shrink the sea of Packers in your own collection? Do you, or how do you collect?
I attempt, I'll tell you that. I try. It's difficult, but I try to boil it down to players that I really feel like one have that history that embodies the city of Green Bay. So you got to be a Packer. You can't be somebody that's bouncing around teams. There's nothing wrong with that. Journeymen are cool, but for me, when I look at my Packers PC, I want to look at people that reflect the city that I grew up in, reflect the team I grew up with. So that's really consists of people like Brett Favre. He was the Packer, the man. Donald Driver, who grew up, he lived a couple blocks away from me growing up. So, trick or treating at Donald Driver's house is a core memory. So he's probably like the biggest one. Then we got people like my new favorite active player. The only active player I think I collect is Jair Alexander, who I think best cornerback in the league. We can have a debate about it later, but he's my guy. I just love the trash talking. I love that he's an elite player with a big city feel that loves the city of Green Bay. And then obviously Aaron Rodgers. He's awesome. He's moved on to a different team, but I'll just ignore that and not collect his Jets cards. And then the craziest story is that Jordan Love, as soon as I moved out for college and moved to Minnesota, Jordan Love moved in next to my parents down the street. So I like to say, I always saw Jordan Love like taking his mail, or he didn't shovel his own driveway, but saw him outside once in a while. So I try to pick up his cheap stuff, but it's been difficult now that he's the next Hall of Famer in line.
Of course, naturally. So I literally was just looking at like player indexes and card ladder, and like Jordan Love was like, out of all the quarterbacks I evaluated, he was up like 40% when everyone else is going down, because he's
Of course.
he's hitting at the right time, and you Packers fans just continue to get good quarterbacks. So I don't want to hear any Packers fans complain about anything, because you have
the 2 month rebuild. The 2 month rebuild was the longest 2 months of my life this past year.
100%. So all right. So like shifting really quick before we
Yeah.
get into Katelyn Clark, talking about Anthony Bourdain, like obviously a cultural icon, and just a jack of all trades, I would say, like very talented human being. Maybe I'd love to learn. I've never heard anyone else collect Bourdain, so maybe like, what is your inspiration there, and also like, what does his card catalog even look like?
This is a big question. I'll try to keep it concise, but Bourdain, when I grew up, my dad watched the news a lot. My family watched the news. We're just a local news person, or local news family. And after the news, it was Anthony Bourdain time. So that would be Parts Unknown or No Reservations or one of his series. And I remember my dad, and sometimes my mom would sit down too, and it was like literally like going to class. Like, sit down, watch Anthony Bourdain, learn something about a different place in the world, learn something about food, about politics, about culture, and really just like digest something that you haven't before. And Bourdain, he went to different parts of the world. He ate all sorts of food. He met all sorts of people. And I distinctly remember the Vietnam episode, which was when he met President Obama in Vietnam. And it was just like an iconic moment in TV history. And I don't know, after reading some of Bourdain's works, so he wrote in his first piece of work was in the April 19th, 1999 New Yorker edition, which I'm still on the hunt for if you see any. But after reading that, after reading some of his books, after learning about his life, which I followed while he was still alive, he just spoke to me in a way that no other celebrity, so to say, did because of his experiences. So I've just kind of been, using him as a tool to collect, and using his cards as a way to like carry on his legacy and just tell stories that he told, and hopefully I can tell in just like a fraction of the way that he did, because he was the ultimate storyteller, if you have read or watched any of his work.
That's
And in terms
incredible.
of, go ahead.
No, that's incredible. I love learning about the reason why and the background for why collectors collect certain things. So I don't when I with you know my continued exposure to him and his work for me
Mhm.
is when I'm like trying to like turn my brain off, and I'll jump on TikTok and like scroll and be like sucked into like some old TikTok video of him. And I'm always it's like one of those things I'll just like watch. I'll just like watch the whole thing because the topic and what he's talking about is always something like you described, like something I'm trying to learn about or super fascinated in or interested in. So that's amazing. I'm curious, like back to like the card component.
Mhm.
What are his card like? Where do you even start? What kind of stuff are you picking up?
Yeah, so he has two main like licensed quote unquote products, which is one from Garbage Pail Kids, which isn't as desired. It's cool. It just wasn't my era of collecting. I do have, the two flagship from that product, but that's pretty much the extent of Garbage Pail Kids. But his big set is 2014 Topps Allen Ginter, which Allen Ginter, by far my favorite set of all time, probably because of Anthony Bourdain, but its significance in the hobby is so underrated
Mm.
and just so incredible. The artwork, the stories on the backs of the cards. I think we forget about that a lot in collecting, is that, people put time into that and write those pieces on the back. And so Allen Ginter, like, if for people that are unfamiliar, is mainly a baseball product, but then they insert celebrities, personalities, musicians, whatever you want to call them. And Bourdain debuted in Topps Allen Ginter in 2014, meaning that he has base cards, mini cards that Allen Ginter are known for, and then obviously the holy grails, the autographs. And I'm fortunate enough this past December to have acquired, in my opinion, the greatest Anthony Bourdain card of all time, which is his red ink auto, hand numbered to 10. And I guess as a little stacking slabs announcement, I did grade that card the past, I think it was 2 weekends ago at Burbank. I sent it with a friend, and it did gem and get a 10, making it pop one in a PSA, pop one in 10. There's no 10s in any other company, making it, I'm trying to say it in a humble way, but probably the best
You don't
card
have to be
in
humble.
existence. So yeah, that's exciting.
So two follow-ups. How did you get this card? And then also, what was going on in your brain when you found out that it gemmed? Like, let us
Oh my god.
inside on that.
Yeah, so I found it on eBay because I religiously check that save search every morning and every night, literally like clockwork. And one morning I found one and it popped up and it was at like, I'll tell you the price. The price was at like 7,000 or best offer. And I was like debating immediately. I was like, do I buy it right now? Like this moment, whatever. I messaged the guy. He's like, I'm open to making an offer or open to offers or deals of some kind. And I hit him with this is my Instagram. Maybe we could maybe we could move this off to eBay. And he follows me and he has zero followers, like maybe 3. And I'm like, oh God, this is concerning. This is scary. Turns out he ended up liking a couple cards in my collection that were vintage cards. I had a 1933 Jim Thorpe, as well as, what else did I trade him? A Jim Brown 1958 Topps rookie. Both in pretty good condition. They're old cards, so they weren't like great grades or anything. But I ended up making him an offer that included those 2 cards and some cash on top, and was really scared of sending those cards without any sort of protection or anything. So he actually, I am going to recommend him forever, his eBay store, but he went to the bank and he got a contract notarized by the bank to say, if something happens, blah, 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 here's my driver's license, all that. We overnight the cards to each other, and the Bourdain shows up. It's fully real. And I've been holding on to it since I think December 12th, and then decided to get it graded at Burbank. And my friend FaceTimed me when the grade came, and I was in shock. I'm still a little bit in shock. I haven't shared it anywhere because of that, just because of how insane it is to me. It's pretty awesome. I got a couple cash wire transfer offers at Burbank themselves, or at the show, and had Golden approach about the card. And I haven't made a decision yet on what I want to do, but it's by far the most expensive and valuable card I've ever touched in my life.
Oh man, that's so good. I love the story. Please, like at some point, whatever you decide, write it to your card. But you everyone go follow Katelyn at Cold Lunch Cards. The way you curate your IG is awesome. So I need to see a post.
Oh, it'll be there.
Okay,
it'll be there. Don't worry.
All right. I think that's a pretty good tune-up so far. So why don't we talk about the main event here, and let's start with Katelyn Clark. I might have put this in the group chat or whatever. I don't know, but I was literally like had a note on my calendar, was like, watch the game tonight, and I got caught up with kids, and my dad like sent a text. He's like, hey, by the way, like Katelyn Clark's going to break the record. She's on in like 5 minutes. I was like, oh, dad's rule. Like I was almost forgot. And I was sitting there watching the game, and the way she like broke the record was, I don't know. Like, I feel like I can't even like put into words to describe like how like elite and badass, like the way she did it. And it pretty much epitomizes her to me, as she's grabbed so many fans. Like she's grabbed me as a fan. And I was like, man, you have this moment, you have, her Superfractor auto selling for just an outrageous amount and continued sales. I was like, this is like a super fun athlete that we will never forget. And she's got cards, and I just think this is worth a full conversation. I know you've got energy around her, so I want to know, like, what was your first exposure to her, and maybe talk through like how your what's your fandom look like with her, like any of those types of stories and connection points.
Absolutely. I think my first introduction to Katelyn Clark, like to really appreciate her, was last year going into the tournament. So maybe like a month or around this time, going into the March Madness women's tournament. She's been an interesting sensation for a long time in the Midwest specifically. I'm not going to sit here and say that I knew her since she was in 7th grade and I've been recruiting her or anything like that. But I would say going into the tournament last year was a big turning point for me to understand, this is something special. There's something special happening in Iowa. There's something special happening in women's basketball, period. And there's something special happening in women's sports. And that was around last year. And I think even since then, she's exploded to an unreal degree, a kind of unfathomable degree. And I think my fascination with her really lies in her talent. It's really what she does on the court that, magnetizes me to her in some way. And I think that her cards pose as not only a really good collecting excuse, but a really good investment opportunity as well, and a really amazing signal about what's happening in women's sports in general in 2024. And so, as we go into the tournament this year, I think we're going to see it even more so.
So I want to stay on the women's sports topic. To me, I feel like athletes like Katelyn Clark are taking women's sports to the mainstream conversation, which isn't something that, I don't know, over the last decade has been like a normal thing. Do you feel like, in your opinion, as a female who watches men's and women's sports, do you feel like women's sports is getting elevated by like the likes of Caitlin Clark and other athletes? Is it trending in the right direction?
100%. And I think it's exploding. It's exponential at this point. We got to remember that the WNBA was only formed in 1997. It's a young league. Do you know what I mean? The idea of women playing pro basketball is relatively new. It is relatively new. And to have such an athlete now, like Caitlin Clark, who's leading the change during the boom of NIL, it's a special time. It's the perfect storm for collecting. It's the perfect storm for women's sports, and it couldn't be led by a better person. I don't know Caitlin Clark, but I've watched enough videos. I've watched her play enough games. I've watched her do enough interviews that you can tell she wants to be at the forefront of women's sports, and she wants to break barriers, and she wants to put not only Iowa but women's basketball on the map.
I'd love maybe there's so many new people that are entering like the Caitlin Clark world and hemisphere, and I'd be curious maybe how would you describe what she's done over the course of her career at Iowa to someone who's just learning about her, who maybe just saw her break the record and it's like, wow, this seems important. How would you sum up what she has done and accomplished so far, maybe in comparison with other, collegiate female athletes?
Oh yeah, well, let's not downplay what other female athletes have done. I think that Caitlin Clark is only here because of what other women have paved the way to do. That's really important, but she's better. She's better. I think there's maybe 1 to 2 other people you could throw in this conversation. Women's basketball specifically. I'll get into who I think is near that list, but I think Clark is really special. Her talent, her charisma, her skills are so unique. I grew up playing basketball, and I was not, all that, not even close, but I grew up playing basketball, and watching Caitlin Clark is something we haven't seen in women's basketball ever, full stop. It's a new type of breed that's coming out of basketball. We've seen a similar shift in men's basketball, since the birth of the 3-point line. And, since Steph Curry entered the league, we're getting smaller, but we're shooting from farther. Bigs are kind of getting an interesting play now. And the same thing is translating to women's basketball. And it's so different in women's basketball, right? Because women are not as strong as men. So it's harder for them to shoot from farther away. Clark doesn't have that problem. She pulls up from 35 to 40 feet. It's insane. She broke the record from 30, 35 feet, just nuts. But if you're just getting introduced to her, I think the way to explain it is one word, which is entertainment. She is an entertainer before she is an athlete, before she is anything else. She is pure entertainment. We see that with the accolades that she's accumulated over the years, right? All-time women's basketball scorer, about to be hopefully all-time scorer, men's or women's. I think she has 51 points left as of today to pass Pistol Pete, all while averaging 20-ish shots a game, which is insane. Pistol Pete did it with 44 shots a game. But, you could go on and on of the stats that she's accumulated. I think something that is huge is, this isn't new. Freshman year, she won the Dawn Staley Award, which is best guard in the country. Did it as a freshman, first time ever that happened. Sophomore year, she is the first D1 player, men's or women's, to record consecutive triple doubles with at least 30 points, which is just nuts to think about. And junior year, obviously this past year, second consecutive Big Ten championship. First Final Four since 93 for Iowa. First ever appearance at the national championship. Breaking so many records, breaking viewership records. I just think her vibe and her entire brand is elevating women's basketball. And if you tune into one game, any game, you can see it immediately. She owns the court. And not only is she, the best shooter we've ever seen, dare I say, I don't think that's very much contested anymore, but she's one of the greatest passers of all time. So you combine those two, and it's just she's an assassin on the court.
I know, like, we've got the tournament right around the corner, and for me, as a fan of basketball, you stack the men's and the women's tournament, and you tell me, like, dude, you get to watch one thing. Like, I'm picking Iowa, like watching Iowa over anything on both sides because it's like, I don't know, there are these moments we have as fans where there's one figure or athlete that's so compelling that they literally like captivate the hearts and minds. And like I feel that in a way with her in her play, especially after watching her break the record. Unlike any other like athlete in recent memory that I'm not like cheering for as my team or whatever. So I think, yeah, super compelling figure. You mentioned, and I would love to like get your like, you mentioned like those who came before her. Who are those names that you would put as like in the conversation, or Katelyn Clark being in the conversation with?
I mean, Clark's in the conversation, period, like at the top, I think, right now. Even if she continues, I think it's undisputed. I don't think there's any sort of debate. But I think in terms of the league, so talking about college and the WNBA, names that come to mind all correlate with the schools that they came from, which is really cool that Clark's doing that for Iowa. So the first thing that comes to mind, women's basketball, UConn. That's like the Alabama of college football, right? Like Gino over there is recruiting his ass off and brings in top players every single year. So you have people like Sue Bird, who played for him, ended up being, a legend at the Seattle Storm. You have people like Diana Taurasi, who played for the Phoenix Mercury. My GOAT in women's basketball is Diana Taurasi, but that's up for debate. You got people like Brianna Stewart, who now plays for the Liberty, who went to UConn, and Maya Moore, who's the local legend here in Minnesota. So that list goes on and on from UConn, and they're all in that discussion. Like, do not think that one of them is not in that. They're producing stars left and right. I'll call out Paige Beckers. She's still in college and playing for UConn, also from Minnesota. She's going to be really good, and I've invested a lot of my card money into her, so I really hope so. But in addition to that, you've got people or schools like South Carolina right now, which is the current dynasty. Kind of think of them like the Patriots almost. They've just got this legendary head coach, Dawn Staley, who's bringing in superstars to compete and knock down teams that we think of today as great women's basketball programs like UConn. And they're doing it in an insane fashion. Obviously, last year, Iowa beat South Carolina to go to the championship. So we got questions there, but they're the obvious favorite going into the tournament. And they've produced people like Aaliyah Boston and Aja Wilson, who are both incredible. Hopefully, Aaliyah Boston gets paired up with Clark this upcoming draft.
Talk to me.
You'll be living. So I think those names are definitely involved. And I do want to call out a couple other ones that are in my top list, which is Candace Parker, legend from Tennessee, who ended up playing for the Sparks, the Sky, and I think the Aces later in her career. Just incredible. If you haven't watched any Candace Parker, get on YouTube right now and watch it. It's incredible. She's captivating. And then to me, the only person competing with Katelyn Clark at that level in terms of greatness is Cheryl Miller. Cheryl Miller went to USC. She was arguably the best women's or men's basketball player of all time, but then couldn't play pro because there was no WNBA at the time. Like, to think about that is insane. And to call her one of the greatest when she didn't even play professionally. But she's arguably up there. And she's at the same school that now Juju Watkins is at, 18-year-old freshman, scoring 50 points, 6'2" guard. Just like, there's a new breed of women's basketball players coming out, and they're all coming at the same time in the same wave as Katelyn Clark. And so I would put all those names and throw in Sabrina Ionescu. I'd throw her in there too as one of the best of all time.
I mean, what's cool, I love it. A great list. Everyone get out your notepads. You got
For
plenty of
real.
homework on YouTube to digest. But I think what's fun, and you put the punctuation point at the end. What's fun about the Caitlin Clark thing is we just came off the heels of the Steph Curry and Sabrina matchup. With ask anybody who watched that Saturday night event, like the only thing that really mattered was that
Sure.
head to head. And I think it's safe to say that Steph Curry is the greatest shooter of all time. And Sabrina came like a hair from
Right there.
right there. And I don't know, it just feels like there's a swarm of attention and fandom around the WNBA that I think, and like you mentioned when you said its origin, like it takes a while. It takes several years. It takes
Mhm.
players to cycle through to continue to build up over time, and it just feels like WNBA is becoming a part of the mainstream sports and mainstream conversation. All right, so let's talk about our cards. So
Ah, my favorite part.
yes, we got to talk about the cards. So, maybe give a 101 into like what cards are available. Who for people who are listening who know about her but have never collected or know anything about
Mhm.
women's basketball cards, like what's available, and then like when she enters the league, like what
Yeah.
will kind of the what are the top products that she'll be in?
For sure. I think we should start with like a little bit of history of what's available in the past and then how
Let's
it's
do it.
different from
Yes,
now. You know, NIL is huge, so like to understand where that changes. So the WNBA started in 97. So that's when the first cards came out was 97, this first wave of cards, 97 to 99. Fleer was like the main manufacturer who held the rights to WNBA. So you had sets like Pinnacle, Hoops, and Fleer Ultra, iconic sets, known as like the original for the WNBA. Then from 2000 to 2004 ish is this golden age of WNBA collecting. You know, we're 3 years into the league. We're starting to see superstars born, you know, dynasties starting, cities starting to rally around these women. And you have Fleer, Skybox, you know, we have Fleer Ultra, Tradition, Heritage, all these different types of cards. Um, think of it kind of as the new era of the WNBA that we look fondly upon, that we, you know, these are the best cards that exist for the WNBA. Then we get to 2005, and Fleer and these companies are having financial struggles. They're not really benefiting from these cards too much, and they lose their rights to a company called Rittenhouse. So from 2005 to 2018, Rittenhouse is the sole producer of WNBA cards due to the rights. You could think of it sort of like the junk wax era, but you know there are still great cards in there, and you know great players that were produced during that time. And then we get to today, which is the fourth wave, the 2019 to present. Panini takes over the rights to the WNBA. So in 2019, Donruss and Optic are released, you know, flagship products for Panini. Next year, Prism hits for the first time ever in 2020, coinciding with COVID, just like this boom, right? And then in 2022, other sets like Origins, Revolution start coming out. Now, where Caitlin Clark falls is because she's not in the league yet. We have this great new thing called NAL and allows Bowman University to just skyrocket. So in Bowman, she has last year's, which is 2022 to 2023, and then this year's. She's got Bowman Chrome, Bowman Chrome Sapphire, Bowman Inception, and then infamous Tops Now, which are super cool. And I think those are really undervalued in terms of her collectability. She's also got two pre-unlicensed college cards. She's got one from her high school, Dowling Catholic, that features, you know, the high school jersey. Not too expensive, probably 50 to $100, depending on, you know, if you're buying it from someone from Iowa or not. And then a Sports Illustrated card, you know, like the iconic Sports Illustrated, crappy quality, nice little paper out of the magazine.
Perforated edges.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of like the landscape of women's basketball cards. And because of Bowman's new growing popularity with NIL, Caitlin Clark has so many parallels and things to collect that women in the past never had.
So the big sale, right, of her Superfractor Auto, um, PWCC Premier Auction, I believe it was in. I think it was 78K. Sent shockwaves. And that was like big sales of anybody always start
Mhm.
conversations, and I felt like there was a lot of conversations around that card. Like when you saw that, what was like what was going on in your head, and I guess like a sale like that, like what's the significance, like what does that mean for maybe her cards in the future, and does that, like a sale like that, help elevate women's basketball cards in the future?
100%. I think the first thing I saw when I saw that sale was I wish I had $78,000 like right now because I would buy that card. That is like one of the coolest cards of all time. Um, but I think seeing that sale made things really real, right? Like women's sports have always kind of just been in the back seat behind men's sports, just how it is. But seeing a sale, of the Superfractor 1 of 1 auto sell for 78K, and just I think it was like 5 months prior, the Wemby equivalent, right? That similar card from the same product only sold for $67,000. I thought to myself, 78,000, that's kind of a lot of money, but that kind of seems like a good deal. I don't know. I don't know. I think Wemby and her are really good data points to compare against each other just because of their sensation, and they're just these new hot players who, are doing things we've never seen before. And I thought to myself, 78K, I think that's a good deal. I think I would have also bought it if I had that kind of money because of her popularity, right? Like when you compare her to Wemby, who is a Frenchman, right? Clark has done it in her backyard, right? And cultivated this since she was super young and has delivered so much success to the state of Iowa. So I think 78K is a great sale for women's basketball for Katelyn Clark cards. And I think it's probably worth more now because she broke the record after that sale.
Mm.
So I think it's a good indication of a healthy market. I think it's serving as a correction almost, not a correction downward like we saw after COVID, but a correction upwards. You know, kind of making it real that women's basketball cards and women's cards in general are worth a shit ton of money. I think we tend to forget other sales. I had one that I looked up before we did this episode, which was the most expensive women's sports card of all time, which is the greatest of all time, period, Serena Williams, who sold her card sold during the COVID boom, of course, in 2022 for over $220,000.
Yes, I remember that. That's yeah, I remember that sale of that card happening, and I think it's been a tragedy ever since. I haven't looked
Right,
at it, but yes, I mean Caitlin Clark, like she's got some work to do to be in that
right.
Serena conference, but it's fun to start
She's getting
following.
there.
She's getting there. Like there's a lot of momentum. I know you have like dipped your toe in the Caitlin Clark collecting universe. What
Mhm.
has been your approach, and how have you navigated so far? And do you have cards? Like maybe talk about that.
Yeah. I do have cards for Caitlin Clark, thank God. I have quite a few now. I've kind of been
Congratulations.
accumulating them. Yeah, thank you. I've been accumulating them over the past couple months, I would say. I wish I would have bought them way earlier, but unfortunately, hindsight's 2020. But I think when I'm looking at collecting Caitlin Clark, it's important to put the Iowa lens on, right? Which is that the state of Iowa has no core professional sports teams. They have no WNBA team, and the University of Iowa is like pumping through the Iowa residents' veins every day. It's the defining factor, right? We can talk about Iowa State a different day. Tyrese Halliburton, those guys, Brock
Brock
Purdy, but
Purdy. I mean,
but
Iowa's got it
Iowa
going on right now.
but we got to talk about the big thing that's sweeping Iowa, which is Caitlin Clark, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we got to remember that as her cards come out in the WNBA eventually, that Iowa people and Iowa fans are still going to want Iowa, uniforms and Iowa cards. So they're going to, I truly believe they're going to hold their value better than other like college prospects and college players. So I've been buying them and not really feeling hesitant about the fact that she's wearing a college uniform. I think being realistic, obviously, rookie cards rule our world, right? Like that is the pillar of collecting players, getting their rookie card. But I've been collecting her first and second year Bowman primarily. I've got one auto of hers, which is the case hit from this year. I've got one PSA 10 pink, just because I like the color pink and it just fits nicely. And then I'm working on a couple color, hopefully a rainbow, not the full thing, that'd be impossible, but a nice little rainbow of Bowman Chrome colors. And my favorite one at right now is the image variation from this year, which in the background you can see University of Minnesota player, which is where I went to school. So I just needed to buy that immediately. Just a little personal touch to the card of her probably beating us like badly.
She beats most teams, so
right.
Don't take it personal. So maybe let's close it out by, I don't know, like this is like the big getting deep with it, I guess. Like, what do you think that Katelyn Clark has the ability just herself to, because there's been, like we've talked about, there's been so many wonderful women's basketball players, and it has, like, especially like going WNBA is not translated to like WNBA and Prism cards being a part of like the main like conversation. Do you think Katelyn Clark has the ability, just when she goes into Prism, and like, can her alone, can she elevate women's basketball cards, or by herself, or like what's the future? What does the future hold?
Yeah. I mean, I think simply put, yes, I think she has the capability. She has to continue to be outstanding. She's never going to get a breath of fresh air in terms of just like any excuses, any of that. She's going to have to continue going at this absurd rate. It's going to have to be sustainable, and I hope she does. But I think it's important to remember, like you said, Katelyn Clark isn't the beginning. She's not the end, but she is everything right now, right? She is the one. So, she's broken records, she's done all these things, and she's redefining landscape of women's basketball in general. And I think that, engaging new audiences, bringing cards and bringing basketball to people who have never once tuned in to a women's basketball game is not something that should be understated. I think, all the statistics they throw out, like last year, March Madness tickets were 3 times more expensive for the women's tournament than the men's. That's real data right there to show you people are paying attention. And that's going to translate over into our world, into collecting. And it's coming fast. And it's going to happen. And I don't think people should underestimate her capability and her talent, because she's only 22 and she's already doing this, right? She hasn't even won a national championship yet. And we're talking about her in the greatest conversation, right? That's insane. That's not normal behavior and normal talent. So I think, she's going to bring media, press, attention, money. She's going to bring everything to that WNBA, and they need it. And I think it's coming at a perfect time with, people like Aaliyah Boston being ready for her to join the team, right? It's just a perfect storm for all the collecting and women's sports in general.
This was just an amazing conversation. You can follow her at Cold Lunch Cards. Katelyn, maybe we do this again after she wins the tournament, or after she goes number one. There'll be plenty of milestones and moments along the way. Really appreciate you coming on to talk all things Katelyn Clark.
Thank you.